In this video, we will discuss how to add operators into the SmartLog Pro Web Manager software. Operators are added in the Administration Operators section. To add a new operator, you would click on New Operator in the upper right-hand corner. First name and last name are self-explanatory. You may add the operator's email address so that they can receive email notifications relevant to them. Setting the status to anything but active will effectively disable a user. There are various field choices depending upon the operator's status. Operator ID is a permanent operator identifier. It must be unique within the system and identifies an operator to a SmartLog, either by keying in the number, scanning a card, or using any other available method. Please note that this field cannot be changed once it is saved. Test ID is an optional secondary identifier that also may be enabled to access a SmartLog. SmartLog will always check an entered ID against all available operator IDs first. If there was no match, it will also check against all available test IDs if this access option is enabled in the SmartLog settings. Unlike the operator ID, this field may be changed. So if you are a company that changes badge / card numbers from time to time, or your employees often lose their cards, you may want to use this field for the badge number since it can be changed easily, and enter something like employee number, for example, for the operator ID that generally does not change at all. Enter the department that the operator belongs to. In most of these fields, if data already exists, you can simply press the down arrow key on your keyboard to see a list of choices to pick from, which makes the entries a lot easier. If an operator is part of a work shift that has been established, you can select that here. If not, you can leave it blank. Group 1 and Group 2 are custom categories for grouping operators. 1 and Group 2 fields are optional as well, so you can leave them blank if they don't apply. Required test is going to define the default test that the operator should be performing on the SmartLog. This may be overridden by your SmartLog configuration settings depending on what you have chosen to use. When the program and testers are used for access control, operator tests usually remain valid for some time, during which the operator isn't required to perform a test again. The hours until retest required field defines this time period. It has no meaning in any other scenario. If your tests are good for 12 hours or 24 hours, an entire day, for example, you can put 24 in here. Marking a operator as only tests periodically removes all recurring test constraints. Once the entries have been made, click on Save, and the operator will be added to the operator screen. And you can see them shown here. Operators are synchronized with all the connected SmartLogs in real time, so any change to operator attributes will get propagated in a matter of seconds. You may also import operators from a file instead of adding them individually in this screen. We have an Import Operators feature in the Tools menu. The import has some advanced features, and it's possible to use it for other tasks like the bulk update of existing operators. For example, you could change the department or the default test setting for a group of operators simultaneously using the import function. Although the operator screen does have the option to update multiple selected operators for certain fields, and that's already built in. The first step in the import process is selecting your input file. Excel, text files, comma, or tab separated files are supported. You may specify whether the first row contains the column names or not in this section here. When the file is selected, a full preview of the contained data is going to be shown in the Preview tab. The preview is quite useful, especially in cases where the column names were not specified in the first row. You can switch between Preview and Options to determine the proper column mapping, or simply to double check everything before starting the import. The next step in the import procedure is defining the column mappings and the default values, which is done in this Options tab. If the first row contained field names, the SmartLog Pro Web Manager will try to figure out the best column mapping. For example, if a column was named Name, it will be mapped to first name in the fields. It's important to note that this matching isn't perfect, and it won't be able to match some columns, or it may match some columns to the wrong fields. So we advise you to check the matching carefully and add missing mappings manually. Correct ones that are wrong, and or remove mappings for columns that should not be getting imported. For example, here it picked up or associated operator ID under the card badge ID, which is something I would not want. So I will remap that to test ID, for example. These others look like they were picked up okay, so I don't need to bother with those. And you can switch back to Preview just to double check, and then go back to Options. Some rows don't have values for standard columns, and it's possible to define defaults in those situations. By default, only status, default test, retest period, and periodic tester fields are marked for applying defaults. In order to also apply department, for example, you would need to enter a value for that and then check mark the box next to it. Only defaults that are checkmarked will get applied during the import. Applying defaults is intended primarily for filling in missing values, but it may also be used to apply defaults to all imported operators. This feature is particularly useful when changing a field value for a group of existing operators. For example, to change the default test for all or some operators, you can perform an export in the operators list view on the operator section, and then import the file that you created while using a new test setting for the default test, and then applying it to all. The last step is the import itself, but before that you can do one last check by clicking on the Prepare button. If there are any errors, you will see a message at the top. Errors have to be corrected in order to proceed. If you have a field error, you can switch back to the options and adjust the mappings, and then click Prepare again. The import data is held in memory, so it's possible to switch between the tabs as often as you need. Finally, if you don't have any errors or all the errors have been corrected, Prepare is going to show you how the imported data will look. It will also be possible to import only a subset of the selected data if the Create, Update, Selected Only option is marked. If both Create New Operators and Update Existing Operators were selected, this final preview will show operators to be created and operators to be updated in separate tables. Prepare is important as the last check because an import can't be undone once you've started it. It's a good idea to review whether the columns were properly matched and all fields have the proper values. If something is wrong, you can always switch to options, change things, and run Prepare again until everything is correct before you commit to it. If everything's okay, you can click Import, and you will see that the operators were added. So I'll go in and I'll do a search for one of the ones that was added. 132 is one of the numbers, and we can search through the filter, and there is the new operator right there that has been added in. Finally, under Tools, there's also an Automatic Operators Import option, which is similar to the import operators that we just covered, but it imports the data automatically from a file that is stored in a specific data folder based on the settings you select. You may read the details about how this option works in the user guide. So these are the options for adding operators in the SmartLog Pro Web Manager. If you have any questions or need help importing operators, please contact the EMIT factory for assistance.